You're watching HuffPost Live. I'm Nancy Red, and adoption can be romanticized as a joyous event when adoptive parents bring kids into a good home and live happily ever after. And don't get me wrong, it is awesome. But like any parent-child relationship, there are real struggles, and everyone involved can face stress from the system and also stigma from outsiders. That's why it's important to observe National Adoption Month and discuss the people and organizations addressing these complex issues and the emotional needs of adopted kids and parents. Joining me now to discuss, we have a great panel, starting with Barbara Freedgood. She's a psychotherapist who specializes in adoption, and she's an adoptive mom of two. Now, Barbara, let's talk about National Adoption Month. Why is it important to observe?
Well, National Adoption Month is so important because it's a time to open up the conversation about adoption. Originally, it was started to help publicize foster children who needed permanent homes, who could not go back to their families of origin. And then it got taken over by the adoption agencies, sort of the adoption business. And now adopted people are stepping up and saying, wait a second, we want our voices to be heard. And they're doing an amazing job of talking about the whole range of feelings in adoption, not only the great part of getting a great family, but also the hard part of losing a family.
And connecting people who get where you're coming from, right? Because that's super crucial.
Other people who've had the same experience.
Well, one of the great things, you are not only a therapist for adoptive parents and adoptees, you also have gone through the system yourself. Talk to us a little bit about your story.
Well, I adopted both my children here in the United States domestically after a period of about 3 years of trying to have biological children. So one of the things you have to do first is mourn your losses, right? Then you just make the decision to adopt, and you search for your children, and you find them, and it feels like this amazing, magical moment. And they also, as they grow up, you need to communicate to them how you found them, what it means to be adopted, really at a very young age before they're entirely ready to understand these things. And then they have their issues of identity and loss. So everybody has to work with loss as well as having a family to love you.
Right.
Adoptive parents really aren't prepared. And I think when you're adopting older children who truly have experienced trauma and consciously, that you have, I always wonder how parents who aren't professionals. I'm a professional therapist, and I struggle with how to care for my children's feelings. I don't even know how people who aren't professionals do it, and the lack of preparation is really unfair to both adopting parents and children. I will say that Spence Chapin these days is doing a much better educational program for people who want to adopt out of foster care. And the first thing they do is try to discourage you. And if you still want to do it, after they've tried to discourage you, then they take you as a candidate.
Well, and here's the thing, wait, that's the thing. I think we're seeing a change in perspective. Like, for example, one of the things that I work on is as a birth mother, a lot of things about pregnancy they do not tell you. And the common thought is, well, if we told you, you would be too afraid to have children. Well, that's just not true. The same thing goes for the adoption process, right? I mean, it wouldn't have deterred you from adopting your children, but boy, it could have changed the game a little bit in those early days where you're sitting there crying in your car, wouldn't you think?
Well, I think you make a really important point that motherhood in general is romanticized, not just adoptive motherhood.
Yes, 100%.
You know, you have this baby and you just live happily ever after. And the truth is that you're exhausted and you're tired, and some days you just want to quit and you can't. And that's true sort of across the board. There's another thing I wanted to pick up on. You were mentioning birth moms, Nancy, and I think it's very, very, very important to acknowledge that no woman gives up her child because she wants to. That, you know, there's economics, there's class, there's race, there's lack of opportunity. There are a whole lot of factors that go into why a person might need to place their child for adoption. In the old days, it was because single motherhood was completely shameful and you could not possibly consider keeping your child as a single parent. That's no longer true. But very often people are in very compromised circumstances where they just cannot take care of a child. But I would say it's the rare mother who places her child for adoption who doesn't grieve also. So every member of the adoption triad or constellation is the word we're using nowadays, experiences a loss that they have to work with.
That's the human experience, right?
Exactly.
And again, we tend to sugarcoat it. You mentioned race. We actually have a great video comment from someone who couldn't join us live, but Nefertiti Austin wants to talk about this topic. Take a look at what she wants to discuss.
I wrote an article for Matrimia.com about why Black people don't talk about adoption. In general, why do you think adoption is a taboo subject?
Well, for example, she recently adopted, and she found that the conversation was quite unusual, and then she wasn't expecting either just a complete shutdown or the type of comments that she received. Do you know anything about this? Do you have any thoughts on it?
You know, I wouldn't pretend to be an expert about the African American community and what their feelings are about that, but I do think in general there's a lot of shame associated with relinquishing a child, and I think that maybe that's being expressed in people not wanting to talk about it.
All right, and it's interesting when we talk about shame and we talk about the community. Barbara, Whitney and I have been friends for some time prior to children, post children, we still survive. And we always talk about keeping it real in whatever facet of life. And Barbara, you and I actually came together because I actually produced a video for the Huffington Post about the phrase real mom. And I want to show the kind of things moms hear, but take a look especially when it comes to adoptive moms. Hey, Mom. Mom, you're not a real mom.
What? What? What the what?
Well, that's what someone told me.
Me too. Apparently, I'm not a real mom because I only have one child.
I've been told that I'm not a real mom because I have a full-time nanny.
Because I only have a daughter and no sons.
Because I travel and work long hours.
I've been told I'm not a real mother because my kids are adopted. Don't tell me I'm not a real mother after what I've been through with these kids.
So Barbara and Whitney, moderator Ryan Martin says, I want to adopt very badly, but I'm scared to get too excited about it due to all the hoops you have to jump through even to begin this process. So we've been talking about the stuff that happens after you get the kids. But what advice do you have, Barbara first, then Whitney, for people who are afraid to get the ball rolling because they're not going into this naive. They're going into this with a little bit of knowledge about how difficult and expensive it can be.
Mm-hmm. It is. And I think people are increasingly being encouraged to adopt, as you have, from foster care because there are so many waiting children in foster care. Joyce Pavo, who is, in my opinion, a national treasure, adoption specialist, and adopted person herself who's worked in the field for years, says we need to find families for children, not children for families. And, you know, unfortunately, there's been a sort of commodification of children that's happened because there are less infants available for adoption. And it's a very difficult situation. There are, I think, at this point, more people who want to adopt than infants available for adoption, at least in the United States. I don't know the global statistics, but I think that we are turning now to our foster care system as we should. We should be taking care of our children in this country. But it is a different journey, and it does require a lot of preparation. And in terms of finding an infant that needs a home, I think patience is probably going to be a big factor, and also finding professionals who really know what they're doing to help you.